Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Sbaffi. Welcome to this lesson on information and communication technologies in healthcare. This is week 4 in your semester 1, and this is the module on Introduction to Health Informatics. This particular lesson is divided actually in 2 parts. This is part 1, and it's recorded and it has a narrative, my own voice, if you want. Then on mole, there's also part 2, which doesn't have my voice in the background, but I don't think there's need for my voice to be in the background because that particular slideshow is self-explanatory. And in that one, I actually I made a list of the latest technologies impacting healthcare and medicine, just for your fun, more than anything. So I covered 12 main fields, and for each of these 12 fields, I provided some example with some web links. So if you want to know more about each of them, you can actually find extra information, extra resources. So I hope you'll find it entertaining if you want. So let's begin. And let's begin with the aims and objectives of this lesson. Well, today's aims are for me to describe you the area of information and communication technology, um, both in general and within the context of healthcare, and also to provide you with some example of how technologies are influencing healthcare. And this is more the realm of part 2 of this presentation. In terms of learning objectives, by the end of this hour, you will be able to describe the concept of ICT and also its role in healthcare. You will be able to provide some examples of technologies and how they are applied in healthcare. And you should also be able to recognize the potential impact of ICT in healthcare, both in a positive and negative way. Before we go any further, I would like to thank these people for contributing to this lesson, particularly Professor Paul Clough from our high school, because he was behind the creation of most of the slides in this slideshow. And then Professor Zhu and Professor Mountain contributed with a couple of slides toward the end of the presentation. So let's begin with the first of many definitions I will provide you with today. And this is the definition of ICT and IT. This particular one has been taken from Techopedia, and I'm reporting the source for your information. And I just read through the first part for you. So information and communications technology, or ICT, refers to all the technology used to handle telecommunications, broadcast media, intelligent building management systems, audiovisual processing and transmission systems, and network-based control and monitoring functions. The usual confusion that happens at this time is, but what is the difference between ICT and IT? Well, according to Wikipedia, information technology, so IT, is often used as a synonym of ICT. However, the scope of ICT is slightly broader. However, in my experience, I can tell you that neither of these two terms is specific of anything in particular. I can tell you in my own experience again that ICT covers all forms of computers, networks, information that IT covers as well, but it also has an extra focus on all forms of communication, so including telephony, mobile, wireless networks, audiovisual systems, and so on. So all those forms of communication that enable movement and manipulation of data. To me, that's the main distinction between these two terminologies, these two aspects, if you want. For other people, many other people actually, They are perfectly interchangeable, and the difference is only in common language. So IT has usually more to do with operators, while ICT tends to be more used by academics and consultants. So it's more a label that we apply to the end users. But in terms of concept, they are intended as the same thing. So I'll leave it to you. And when you'll have enough experience, or probably already have actually enough experience of ICT yourself, you probably would be able to come up with better definitions of both ICT and IT. And actually, if you do so, please let me know. Please drop me an email, because I would really like to update my definition, this definition myself. However, in this lesson, we'll cover information and communication technologies. So what is this all about? Well, information and communication technologies covers a range of technologies, as the word implies, particularly for gathering, storing, retrieving, processing, analyzing, transmitting, and receiving information. And it covers a number of fields, including all those listed here. For example, communications in terms of radio, TV, computer networks, smart mobile phones, hardware, for example, control systems of mobile phones, computers, peripherals, or softwares in terms of operating systems, desktop applications, database systems, everything we probably are more familiar with, services. Again, this is something else we might all be familiar with in a way or another. So teleconferencing, email, e-commerce, our beloved Amazon, or banking and finance. PayPal is a bright example. And then we have standards applied to hardware, messaging, protocols, codings, and standards are often, unfortunately, overlooked. Sorry, standard are in a very simple term, defined as a document that provide rules or guidelines to achieve order in a specific context. In ICT specifically, standards address the needs for interconnection and interoperability of complex communication systems that are required to actually work at all levels with each other, so interwork with each other. And this is particularly important in nowadays open markets, where users can mix and match equipments and services. And also, standards are equally important for ensuring safety, reliability, and environmental care. Today, ICT is defined as the convergence of digital processing and communication technologies. Just to give you yet another definition of ICT. Now, this is another definition I'm pretty sure most of you are already familiar with, so I'm not stopping or discussing this slide with particular detail. It's here for your information. It is here for completeness of the topic, because we are talking about ICT applied to healthcare. So if I give you a definition of ICT, I also need to provide you with the definition of healthcare. And there it is. So to move ahead, actually, because within your program in health informatics, you will cover a number of topics of issues directly connected to health information. These issues, these topics, as I said, can be probably summarized in this slide. This diagram has been created by Peter Bath for one of his publications. This is from the Journal of Information Science from 2008. And these are various aspects of your program. So the health informatics, the health information management, and the medical informatics. Each of the three definitions has being provided for you in the text boxes. But to give you an overview, ICT is something that encompasses all of them, is something that permeates all of them, and you'll find that out in your own time and in your own way. So how does ICT apply to healthcare situations? Well, we have increasing complexity of situation. So we start from home and community care, where users are, well, ICT users are patients, carers of patients, community nurses or community GPs who go to people's homes, maybe to monitor their health, to treat basic simple conditions, to facilitate, educate in self-care and so on. In primary care, we find ICT used by GPs, by community nurses and staff in healthcare centers. And again, to educate people, for example, on healthy lifestyles, to provide diagnosis and treatments of the most common conditions. Then we can move up to cover secondary and tertiary care, where it's used by specialists in hospital for standard diagnosis of in and out patients with medical conditions that cannot be treated either at home or in normal healthcare centers. And then we move further upwards in quaternary care, which is defined as an extension of tertiary care, and it's used by highly specialistic staff in highly advanced medical settings. One example is experimental medicine, and in fact, not every hospital or medical center can offer quaternary care. So it's something incredibly advanced. And then it's also used by the corporate and management aspect of the healthcare. So it's used by all those healthcare managers, financial, human resources managers to plan and manage for long-term national health services. These are the requirements for healthcare which the UK is facing for the near future. This is, in other words, where the NHS is moving towards, ideally. So as you can see from this list, there's an increase in patient-focused healthcare, where the patient self-manages more and more, is made aware more and more of his or her care pathways, and it has more and more say about the way he's treated or she's treated. Another requirement is the provision of treatment as close to the patient's home as possible, for the dual benefit, both for the patient and both also for the medical staff, for the healthcare professional providing the treatment. It saves time, it saves money, it's more effective. We are also moving towards what is called integrated healthcare services. So this is a more holistic approach to health. There are two different kinds, actually. The horizontal integration, which involves multi-professional teams, but the members of these teams have similar levels of care towards the patient. And then we have vertical integrations with actually different levels of care. So primary, secondary, and tertiary care usually. So the patient is moved from hand to hand, from basic care towards more specialistic care later on during the condition. The healthcare is also moving towards increasing the number of services that are free at the point of care. Nowadays, the majority of NHS services are free at the point of use. For example, seeing a GP or a community nurse or a nurse in a healthcare center. Some routine screenings are free. A typical example is the NHS health check, which is done for free to all the people between 40 and 74, I believe. But there are still some services which are not covered. For example, when foreign patients need to be treated, they have to pay a fee. For example, my mom, every time she comes from Italy and she's sick because she's 85, she needs to pay sorry, £50. Or our visits to dentists and opticians are not covered. Some prescriptions are not covered. Some of the non-basic vaccinations when we go on holiday in a tropical destination and so on. Some other optional treatments are not covered either. Another example could be the repair of varicose veins. That is left at the discretion of the GP treating a certain person. If varicose veins don't provoke any discomfort, is very hardly going to be provided as an NHS service. It needs to be paid for privately. So if we want to integrate some of these services which are not covered at the moment, how can ICT help support these goals? Well, first of all, for further information, you can look again on MOL. I uploaded a report from the Royal Society released in 2006 on digital healthcare and the impact of information and communication technologies on healthcare. But some possibilities are listed in this slide, for example. In fact, ICT has the potential of transforming the delivery of healthcare and addressing future health challenges in a variety of ways, which range from providing equipment for individual healthcare all the way up to providing and maintaining nationwide systems communications. It has the potential also to enable healthcare professionals to share information with each other so that at the end of the day can actually make informed decisions, better informed decisions. And this can only happen actually through the standardization of communication technologies, as I was discussing a few slides before. So standards are incredibly important because allow local, regional, national, and even international system to operate synchronously at the same time and therefore share and update information. And ICT is also important because this is a reality. It supports a healthcare organization in meeting their information management needs and strategies. This is happening through the NHS information management and technology departments, which are responsible for the clinical, administrative information systems, as well as actually switchboards in hospital, health record departments, and so on. Then, for example, until I believe 31st of March 2013, there was something called Connecting for Health framework, which was responsible for maintaining and developing the NHS IT infrastructure all around UK. From 2013, Connecting for Health was taken over by the Health and Social Care Information Center, which is now called NHS Digital, and there's a slightly different role from the original Connecting for Health framework. Now they store and analyze data on hospital activity in the NHS throughout the whole of England. But because data and information are the building blocks of ICT, what are data and information? What are the differences, if any, between them? And this is a very simple little table for you to have finally an idea of the distinction that we must make between data and information. So data is something unstructured, data is something raw that doesn't have any intrinsic meaning, it's just a value. Information is data when it's actually processed and structured and organized. So we give them a contextualization, we give it a meaning. One very simple example could be a student test score on a maths test, for example. I suppose, I don't know, 75. What does that mean? Is it good? Is it bad? We don't have any reference to anything else, so we cannot make any assumption on this value. But if then we look, for example, at the mean score of a class, or even at the mean score for the entire school, then that becomes information because it's contextualized, it gives some context, it gives some generalization, and so it's data applied to a particular focus, to a particular research question, if you wish. In terms of the origin of the two terms, well, data is something we've been using since Latin times, since the Roman Empire. The singular word, which is the original word, is datum, and again, it's something we use even now, means something given. The use of the term as we conceive it now dates back to the 1600s. Information is an older word because it goes back to the 1300s and it comes from the old French language. And it has been always used to refer as to the act of informing, usually applied to education and instruction rather than technology and communication as we do in this particular lesson. But again, I thought it was just a nice little table to show you. So just to summarize, data represent unstructured data. Data is something that is not being contextualized, and it's not interpreted, so it's difficult to put into some context of any type. For example, here I'm giving you this numeric string 250792. It could be anything, but then information provides that data with some meaning. So for example, that string could represent a date of birth, could refer to a product code, could refer to a project code. In many companies, each project is associated to a numerical code. And information can be delivered in a variety of ways, through a variety of media. It can be in the form of images, sounds, speech, videos, illustrations, and so on. And another characteristic of information, which is very typical of our days, of our generation, is that we are subject to information overload. We are not subject to data overload, because data is something more detached from us. We get data in the form of information, so when it has been contextualized, and we are subjected to huge volumes, huge amounts of data being produced and then contextualized, and it's incredibly difficult for us to make a distinction between relevant data or information that is actually plain wrong, that it's misleading, that is actually important and well written. So we have a number of issues with both data and information. But considering that technologies are the ways in which we apply and use information, we must make sure that such information and the data the information is based on is accurate, timely, so it's relevant to a specific task we have at hand. It's complete, it's easily accessible and is relevant to what we have and we want to achieve. There are, of course, many ways of visualizing data, and we use data visualization simply because we want to learn new things about our data. We want to highlight maybe patterns and trends. So there are many ways in which we can do that, which go from very simple bar charts to highly complex 3D scans. In these slides, I'm just presenting few of them, but of course there are many more, and you can come up with as many as you wish from your own experience. So now let's move on and let's give you some more definitions. In this case, this is the definition of information systems. Well, there are, again, many definitions, even in this case, and you'll learn much more about this specific topic next year during the spring semester when you'll take INF6514, the module called Information Systems in Health, delivered by Christopher Foster. Basically, information systems, this is a definition which I found in a book by Avison and Fitzgerald from 2003, is a system which assembles, stores, processes, and delivers information relevant to either an organization or a society in such a way that the information is accessible and useful to those who wish to use it, including managers, staff, clients, and citizens. The original definition of information system doesn't imply that the system has to be computer-based, so it doesn't imply the use of any computer. However, nowadays, more and more information systems are computer-based systems, simply because that's the way society is going forward. An information system can also be viewed as a set of interacting components, and such components are usually people, object, technologies, and procedure, which all work at the same time in different aspects. And as I said, ICT is now becoming a key component of most of our information systems. Now, healthcare information systems, or HCIS, are a great example of how ICT can support and aid healthcare. And there are two main types of healthcare information systems. Those that look after the administrative aspect of the information, and those that look after the clinical, the medical aspect of the information. So these healthcare information systems provide and support ICT that facilitate quality patient care, ideally continuous medical training and education, and even more ideally, they promote innovative research. Now, in the past, and this is the past, in the past, healthcare information systems used separate systems for each department, maybe within a hospital or within a clinic. And each of these departments had very limited communication among each other. So there was a large margin of error and a large possibility of information being lost, being in transition from one point to another point in the clinic, and so on. Nowadays, clinical information systems aim to various departmental systems at the same time, and the integration happens via the patient databases, pretty much, so the patient record databases. For the information system to be able to do that, there's an underlying need for standardization. And in this case, the standardization requires that, for example, the patients have to be referred to in the same way throughout every single department, so that the information we gather for a specific patient can be collected in one place, because it is reported all under the same unique code. Again, hospital information systems are a type of healthcare system. And again, in this case too, you'll know more about this concept when you'll take INF6514. But hospital information systems are an element or an aspect of health informatics that comprises of an integrated information system designed to manage all the medical, administrative, financial, and even legal issues that are concerning with a hospital. Typical function of an HIS are the support and the planning and organization of day-to-day activities. They support also the correction and the changes of these planned activities and the cost associated with the changes associated. They support clinical research, they support the management and the human resources system. And example of people who use HIS are, for example, nurses wanted to input or get some patient data, head of clinical department who are planning healthcare provision for that certain department in the coming weeks, so they're trying to do some forecasting. Members of the hospital board, which use the system for management support. It could be government officials who are gathering public health data, for example, to provide reports and updates to the general public. Now let's move to, I wouldn't say more fun aspects, but digitization is the building block that facilitated the spread of information systems, and it's a key ICT development. Here is yet again another definition. It's taken from Wikipedia, and it is defined as the representation of an object or an image, sound, document, or any signal by generating a series of numbers, 1 and zeros, that describe a discrete set of its points or samples. So the result is called digital representation, or more often, more specifically, digital image for an object, or digital form for a signal. Now, this is the overall definition. This is how digitization has had an impact in the way we communicate, in the way we use information. In the past, different items were represented through different media. So a text was represented through maybe a book or a newspaper, an image through a magazine, a sound through the radio, a video through the television, and so on. And the audience, so the end receivers, the public, would have to choose to select one media, to be able to select a different piece of information they wanted to gain. Nowadays, it's completely different, because all these media are converted into the same stuff, into the same objects through digitization, which is the transformation of all these means, all these items, into their binary form, so into a series of 0-1 numbers, the 0-1 sequences. So all these items are digitized, and then they are transmitted through one single device, which is the computer. And the audience, the end users, now have simply to click on a button, and can select the kind of information they want to have. And this has implied a huge transformation and huge difference in the way we perceive communication. So what have been so far the effects of digitization? Well, first of all, there's been a massive shift from mass towards personalized communication. Well, before we had very few television channels, for example, we could really choose among very few programs. Now we have millions of, no, millions maybe not, but hundreds for sure, television channels. We can go online, select YouTube videos, news videos, news of other kinds, just written, for example. We can listen to music. We can, move through a slideshow. We can do anything we want at any time. And probably nobody else in the world is using the same information in the way we do at that specific point in time. So it cannot get any more personalized than that. The shift is also from very limited to very rich interactivity. So that in the past we were just switching on the TV button and we were sitting there looking at a program. Nowadays, we are able to send feedback to a company, send an email, talk online through social media. We have an endless set of possibilities of resources to interact with people, to interact with machines, to interact with each other, and so on. And this is something I've already covered. So we also have moved towards the delivery of multiple types of media through one single channel, which is the computer. And that could have been done only thanks to digitization. Another very important, another key ICT development that has also gained a lot from the spread of digitization is mobile communications. Mobile technologies are changing all the time and are actually defined in terms of generations. Here and in the next slide, I'm not going to cover each of these generations in great deal. Again, these dot points are here for your information. It's just to show you that mobile technologies are moving really fast. The first generation of wireless mobile technology was developed in the early 80s and was actually available to the public in the early 90s. It used an analog signal and the connection speed was 2.4 kilobits per second, so it was very poor. There was some text, there was some sound, but the interactivity, for example, was very limited. It improved with the second generation with the use of digital signal rather than analog signal. This connection speed went up to 64 kilobits per second. And at that time, there was some access to the web, if you wish, but it was still very limited, very slow, very patchy, and very, very annoying, if you remember. Then there was the advent of the 3G, when we had our first iPhones, iPhone 3, in the early 2000s. And in this case, the connection speed increased dramatically up to 2 megabits per second. The 3G connection was able to provide a permanent connection to the web, quite reliable, fairly fast. For the first time, we could watch videos and we could take videos on our mobiles as well. At this time, at present, we are living in the 4G, so fourth generation, developed in the late 2000s. Speed again increased incredibly up to 1 gigabits per second. There have been some important features improving the security, the privacy of users, and the companies have tried to lower the services costs. But there are already sectors which are using the 5th generation, which just initiated last year. Speeds are further improved to 10 gigabits per second, and everything is now moving towards high definition quality. The global coverage has improved, and there are more attractive features, but I don't really know how attractive or in what way they are attractive. So we'll see about that. And then in the pipeline, we are also looking at the 6th generation, which in theory should be available to us by 2025, which is based on quantum technology. And in this case, the speed, the connection speed, it won't change a great deal. It will move up to 11 gigabits per second. But the highlight, it will be that it will integrate the 5G technology with the satellite networks to guarantee 100% actually 360-degree global coverage. And this is a little question for you. Where and how do you think mobile phone technology could be utilized in healthcare? Again, try to answer this question in your own time and in your own way, because of course I provided you with some resources. One of them is this article by Darrell West from May 2012 on how mobile devices are transforming healthcare. But if you could come up with your own answers before you also watch part 2 of this lesson, that would be just nice. So now let's move to ICT developments and application which are probably more strictly relevant to healthcare. And one of them is definitely telemedicine or telehealth. Telemedicine is something that enables patients to take more control over their health, if you wish. It's defined as something that uses telecommunications for the clinical care of patients. So it involves, of course, the use of telecommunications, so the ability to transmit voice, video, and even patient data between two sites which are located into geographically distant sites. And this is all done using networking technologies. So it's used to connect people who are distant geographically, and this is done by using telecommunications, as simple as that. So telemedicine allows for long distance patient healthcare professional contact to assist both in the diagnosis and monitoring of existing conditions. In fact, I would say is typically used to support patients with long-term or chronic conditions, or for patients who have social care needs. For example, for the patients who suffer from chronic diseases, typical example could be people with chronic heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, epilepsy, hypertension. There are a number of conditions which are becoming more and more common to monitor online, so using telemedicine. And simply, in this list I'm presenting here, I include some other applications, but I would say that nowadays this managing of chronic condition is still the wider aspect of telemedicine. Another incredible improvement in the healthcare system that has been possible because of ICT, was the introduction of electronic patient records. They are defined as, I would say, a series of software applications which bring together all the clinical and administrative data for a single patient in a single place. And they have been created out of desperation, I would say, because there were so many problems with the traditional record keeping, so the paper keeping, because of the increasing number of records. The management of such records was becoming more and more complex. So definitely that was a great improvement. You can actually read through this slide. Something I want to point out is that sometimes there is confusion in terms of the terminology. So here I'm using electronic patient records. Sometimes you might have heard of electronic medical records, which are exactly the same thing as the electronic patient records, but this is the terminology used in the US. So the electronic medical records are used in the US. And they're mostly used to indicate the information provided by one clinic or one institution. So it's not a collection of data. And a variation of electronic patient records is what it's called electronic health record, which is something actually more complex, more complete, because it covers the history of a patient from birth to death. So in this case, different care settings or different institutions contribute to aggregate data into a single record. I must say we are slightly behind in terms of seeing this development, because of course it is logistically very complex to achieve. People move throughout their lives, they move residency, they move city, they move country, they even move continent. So we are still in the infancy of seeing electronic health records being widely spread. And of course, we also still have to take into consideration, and we still have to fully solve issues that are pertinent to electronic patients' records. For example, the problem of hackers, which can access personal information at any time, the possibility of uploading somebody else's record by mistake, of making public somebody's record by mistake. So there are all these privacy and protection issues that are being dealt with to some extent, but they are not being completely solved. And standards, which are basically the overarching concept that allows for ICT to contribute to the improvement of healthcare provision, are, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, often overlooked. Well, but as I said, they are incredibly important. And here I'm providing you with, I lost count of the definitions I've given you, but this comes from the International Organization for Standardization, and defines standards as documented agreements containing technical specifications to be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. In ICT, well, they of course they need, they mean that the information needs to be exchangeable so that the system can communicate with each other and can update each other and can improve the functionality of each other. In ICT, there are standards for terminology, messaging, coding, networkings, and so on. In healthcare, some of the standards we use include DICOM for data exchange, HL7 for messaging standards, SNOMED for clinical terminology, and so on. Standards are regulated by separated bodies. One of them I just mentioned to you, the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, or there's the ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and they cooperate with each other to make sure that, of course, because we are talking about standards, standards are the same across the board. Another characteristic of standards is that they can be either open, so pretty much free. For example, the standard behind the JPEG format is free, or they are proprietary. For example, QuickTime is one of this kind because it belongs to Apple. So to be able to use it, we have to pay Apple. Now we are very much towards, seeing the end, the light at the end of the tunnel. We are covering now the last few slides of this presentation. I just want to spend some words about smart cities because, again, this is something, a concept towards which our societies are moving forward. And again, even for this concept, there are no universally accepted definitions. However, I believe that a smart city could be seen as a urban area where human wisdom and technologies are fully and successfully integrated together. And these 10 points are the main points that should be covered to make sure that we are actually that we are actually moving forward and towards smart cities. I've highlighted the smart medical aspect because that's what we're doing here. So as you can see, there are several points within that aspects which need to be looked at, going from personalized medical filing systems, so electronic patient records, a prompt health emergency response, the addressing of food and drugs traceability to be able to stop counterfeit and falsification of food and pharmaceuticals, which is a plague at the moment. And then there's the concept of telemedicine to improve community hospitals to be made in communicating with each other, to be able to offer also extra services other than the primary care, which is standard at the moment, and to also provide individualized medical services to all patients. And this is another summary slide, if you want, to show you what the ingredients, what the elements for interesting and attractive technology are. First of all, most of us would like to use technologies that is nice looking, that would be nice to possess, to have, so that we all, to a certain extent, desire. So it has to be, with a good design, nice looking. And it has to be useful. So it has to apply to our own purposes. It has to be to present a certain degree of connectivity, so it should be able to connect with all the other devices we have in the house to be able to communicate with them and integrate with them. And it has to have some sort of technical capability. And for that, here, I intend the ability to acquire new technologies and technical resources, so to expand its use without the constant need for new replacements. I know that big slices of the market out there are based on people who want the latest mobile phone, the latest computer, and so on. But an equally large portion of the market, if not larger, actually looks for something that is there to stay, is there, that is strong, that is robust, that can withstand the the pressure of time. And of course, a useful, an alluring piece of technology is also something that is easy to use. So it doesn't have bulky, manuals associated. It doesn't have complicated operations to perform to get a certain result. So it has to be easy, as simple as that. And this circle keeps repeating itself over and over, and it can be applied to all sorts of technologies, not necessarily only in the medical and healthcare field, but in every technological field. And we all are aware of the fact that technologies will keep developing in spite of us, in spite of everything. The world civilization moves forward. And these, to me, these 5 points are the main aspect towards which technology is going to improve the most. The first one is about global communication and information infrastructure, intending with that all the facilities that support the information society, so the equipment, the systems, the application, and so on, that are needed for operating in an information society. There will be more and more personal and ubiquitous technologies. So technologies will be everywhere. They will be applied to everything, from the simplest thing to the most complex and elaborated thing. There will be an improvement in data capture and imaging, more than anything to guarantee data accuracy. And when we capture and store data properly, this improves our ability to analyze response results and build trusts in organizations, build trusts in our own findings and in the findings of the organizations. High performance computing, which is intended here again as the practice of collating computer power in a way that delivers much higher performances than we could get out of a typical computer. And this is done in order to solve usually complex problems. And problems, particularly when we deal with large amounts of data, are becoming more and more complex. In engineering, in science, in medicine, we need to deal with amounts of data and research questions, if you want, that are not easily solved by using our own laptop. So we have to use what is called high performance computing. And finally, autonomous and robotic systems, which are all those systems, usually in the form of machines, that perform tasks by themselves without explicit human control. And these autonomous systems will become more sophisticated and more independent with time. They will become more realistic, if you want, and they will help us in more and more daily operations. And ideally, they will also decrease, in costs. So what are the challenges of implementing ICT in healthcare? Well, this is a list, but it's by no means extensive. These are just some of the key points I would like to bring to your attention. Healthcare needs at the moment are urgent because, as you well know, healthcare professionals are under constant time pressure. The staff is limited. The patients are increasing in number, and the pressure is mounting on all level and all grades of healthcare professionals. And the intolerance of the public, but also of the professionals, for system failure is minimal, is decreasing, because technologies have made us accustomed to having everything now and everything to a fairly high level of standard. So our patience, our tolerance is decreasing very, very rapidly. But we still have to bear in mind that we are dealing with vulnerable people affected by conditions, sometimes long-term, life-lasting conditions, sometimes very serious. And we still have to bear in mind that we have to use a certain level of cautious and sensibility. just to not be on the side of ICT people and ICT professionals, but sometimes the expectations towards ICT is a bit unrealistic. It seems like ICT can solve all the problems in medicine and healthcare, and often that is not the case, simply because there are technological limitations still going on, but there are also money limitations, because many implementations of new technologies depend on government fundings, and to be able to access these fundings is incredibly hard, incredibly time consuming, and many times they just result in nothing. ICT people also have to deal with the fact that healthcare systems are very complex, and they are becoming more complex every day because people, patients, and staff members increase in number and increase in variety and number of demands. And this also causes a large volume of data being generated every day from independent sources, from single doctors, GPs, clinic, hospitals, the human resources department, and so on. And ICT is supposed to deal and integrate and organize and make sense of all of this. So at this stage, we just don't really know what the actual effect of ICT in healthcare can be, how much healthcare can be, the problems of healthcare can be solved by implementation of ICT. It's too early stages to be able to quantify that. But whatever the result, whatever the outcome, we always must take into consideration that the security, the privacy of patients' data is vital, is at the forefront of all the decisions we make in terms of integration, in terms of updating, in terms of scaling up, however you want to call it. Privacy and security of patient data must be guaranteed at all costs. We are at the end, finally. I would like you to have a look at this Royal Society report on digital healthcare, which provides you a measure of the impact that information and communication technologies have on healthcare. It's true that it's slightly outdated, it's 10 years old, but it still contains a lot of valuable information. And in particular, I would like you to find out what the Royal Society recommends for implementing effective ICT in healthcare, and what non-technical factors are mentioned in the report. And to conclude, these are some references you might find useful if you want to dig a bit deeper, if you want to know a little bit more about some of the topics I've covered today. So I hope you find this enjoyable. Now I leave you to part 2, which is, I would say now, really the fun part, because there's no my voice in the background, so I will not bug you. You can scan through the slides in your own time. And I think some of the technologies I'm showing you in that part are quite fun, are quite interesting. And as I said, under each slide, there is a web link for you to click on, or to copy paste actually, and find more information about that specific technological advance. So thank you for listening, and goodbye for the moment.